The sea keeps two ledgers, one for what it takes, and one for what it returns when it wants to be cruel. Tonight, the water breathes like a sleeping animal, long, slow exhalations that fog the rails and make the deck sweat brine. The net rises heavy with writhing silver, but snagged among the scales is a green glass bottle, scarred by barnacles, stoppered with pitch the color of old blood. The glass glimmers as if lit from within, and for a fleeting second, every compass needle dips. The seal breaks. The paper inside unfurls like a pale tongue. The words are inked in a hand that knew storms, signed by a crew, swallowed in 1912, and dated the year after. A voice from the dead, forecasting its own impossible future. The night tightens. Something knocks the hull from below, a sound like knuckles on a coffin. Far off, a bell rings where no buoy should be. The water darkens, deepening not in color but in intent, and the horizon seems to tilt toward them, inviting a choice they do not yet understand. Morning drags itself out of the sea like a soaked flag, and with it comes the headache of questions that don't fit inside daylight. Charts don't list a buoy where the bell rang, and no weather report explains the metallic taste clinging to the tongue. The paper feels older than its date and newer than its dust, as if time itself rewound to write it. A second reading adds injuries. A line about a mouth that moves, another about the white stare beneath the water that climbs. The boat engine stutters twice in agreement. In the harbor, rumors move faster than tides, and someone always knows more than they should. The decision grows in the small silences between words. Follow the letter's coordinates past their last good sense, or turn away and carry its weight like an anchor that never bites. Either way, the sea counts. The harbor master listens like a confessor, and when he speaks, he doesn't argue with the date. He argues with the way the tide turns near a certain reef, with the wreck that appears on sonar only when no one records it. He's seen the bell buoy too. Says it drifts on nights when the fog smells like copper, and he keeps a list of boats that chase it and return with stories that do not overlap, only rhyme. He draws a box on the chart where compasses misbehave and calls it polite names to keep it small. The letter asks for a witness, or perhaps an accomplice. If there is a stair beneath the water, it must climb somewhere, and if it climbs somewhere, something climbs it. They set their gear in neat rows, because order is a spell against panic. The horizon brightens, thin as a blade. Somewhere beyond, a bell rings twice without wind. By late afternoon, the sea regains its appetite. The sky dims without truly darkening, a bruise that never ripens. They aim the bow toward the coordinates, as if threading a needle sewn through different years. The radio coughs weather bulletins and then a voice that cuts in clean, too clean, requesting they state their tonnage in a cadence that belongs to another century. The letter is now a map, and the map is a dare. At the mark, the water does a strange thing. It breathes inward. The sound rises from beneath, like a staircase being climbed by something with wet feet and patience. The bell buoy appears ahead like a punctuation mark nobody remembers how to use. They exchange the smallest nods, the kind given before a door opens to whatever stands behind it. The bottle rolls on its side and points the mouth toward the deep. The bottle rolls on its side and points the mouth. Night returns with intent, not with stars. The coordinates match, the bell claps once, and the depth sounder loses its numbers as if the seafloor has decided to step aside. The letter's last lines speak of answering where the stair begins, and the inked hand grows unsteady, as though writing aboard a ship that was already sinking. The bottle, emptied of its message, begins to fill itself. First with condensation, then with a slow curl of mist, then with pinprick lights like town windows seen from a midnight train. The engine idles, the water hushes. Something opens. The bow dips a fraction without a wave to explain it, and in the stretched second that follows, every bird on the pier, miles away, lifts into the air. The world feels calibrated to a hinge, ready to swing. Whatever waits below has learned to send invitations. They circle the depression until the wake scribbles over itself like a signature they cannot quite forge. The radio whispers with intervals of silence that feel placed, not accidental, as if someone were measuring their breath from beneath. The letter's copperplate repeats in memory, each flourish becoming a curl of foam around the mouth of the sea. When the engine is cut, the hull stops speaking and shudders and begins to listen. The water below issues a slow exhale, and a cooler draft climbs the scuppers, a cellar door opening upward. From somewhere not accounted for by horizon or sky, a light moves, neither above nor below, but between. And their eyes adjust to a depth that isn't depth at all. A voice not carried by air but by attention asks in its silence if they have brought the witness it asked for. The bottle rolls, taps a stanchion, and points again. None of them claim to hear anything, yet all three answer with the same precise nod. At dawn, the fog organizes itself like a jury. 12 thick slabs that drift into place and close ranks. Jakob answers their call on the second ring, voice sanded and careful. And when they describe the stair, he doesn't laugh. He flips a logbook to a page head marked years ago and reads coordinates that rhyme with theirs. He tells them a story of a diver who surfaced with his watch running backward and a forearm seamed with neat, parallel marks like tally lines. He warns that the bell buoy drifts not with water but with a rumor of current that begins when someone says the date out loud. They promise not to, but the date already speaks by itself, a presence in their mouths. He offers to meet them at the headland with a light and a thermos and the kind of advice that costs nothing until it's followed. They agree, and the fog closes like a lid. They return to the coordinates armed with borrowed superstition and a list of cautions. Never speak the date. Never answer a name you didn't give. Never follow a light that knows your route home. The bell buoy, 13, waits canted, its clapper still as if listening. The letter's map asks for a witness, and so they bring a camera older than their memories, the kind that grinds and drinks light in measured gulps. When the first frame turns, the sea obliges by showing its teeth, white ridges arranged like steps viewed from above. The engine ticks cool metal. The deck smells of iron and iodine. In the quiet, a gull's cry breaks like thin glass, wrong for the species and hour. They anchor on a line that seems less to hold the boat than to tie it to a sentence mid-clause. Below, something patient paces up and down a stair they cannot see, and time begins to glaze like ice. The camera catches what eyes can test. A figure in Edwardian oilskins half seen in the reflection on the glass of the wheelhouse, leaning exactly where no one stands. The face is the shape of a decision deferred. The cap's braid belongs to a captain no longer owed obedience. The letter's hand returns in voice. No sound, but the arrangement of ink recalling the arrangement of ribs as a ship strains. It speaks of the mouth that moves, and asks again for the witness. Perhaps witness means a promise to remember without explanation, to carry the weight of what cannot be rendered to anyone who didn't stand here. The sea presents an offering, a swell that lifts and holds instead of passing on, like the cupped palm of something enormous. They taste copper on the air and hear, faintly, a woman counting under her breath in an accent that belongs to colder harbors. The bell finally moves and does not ring. The letter's final paragraph, which none of them recall reading before, announces itself as if it has been waiting for the right weather inside their skulls. It names a depth that instruments refuse and a stair that climbs when addressed politely, and it offers a bargain. If the witness writes what the sea shows and seals it where glass remembers, those who were lost may finish. Arriving, the bottle sweats in the cold and fogs like breath. Within, A meniscus quivers though no one moves it. Jakob's warning about the rumor current feels suddenly literal as their minds begin to drift along sentences that didn't exist a minute ago. The decision reaches for them with hands they don't see. One of them takes the cap off a pen. Another steadies the paper. The third watches the bell, which does not ring because the ringing is now inside their chests. Somewhere the stair begins to rise. The first word set to paper feels like lowering a weight over the side and listening for the splash that never comes. The hull hums with a tone not entirely mechanical, a long vowel stretched until it thins to wire. The stair below does not show itself so much as insist on being counted, each breath landing with an uninvited number in the back of the mind. When they try to speak, the syllables snag on an unseen current and drift, arriving seconds late as if the night edits them for sense. The bell buoy leans away as though to stay clear of whatever rises, and the sea around the depression tightens its spiral. A patient corkscrew turned by a careful hand. Ink darkens, spreads, and then holds shape, an obedient tide in miniature. They keep writing what they do not see, describing the pressure of an approach that any sane chart would label as weather. Above them, the sky lowers one notch. Memory misfiles itself and returns dressed in another century's coat. A syllable not theirs knocks once inside the wheelhouse glass, and with it a scent of coal smoke and carbolic that does not belong to this boat. The letter, obedient at first, begins to show new lines where blank had been, as if the act of observing folds a page from somewhere else into the sleeve. The voice they do not hear resumes counting in a cadence too steady for fear, and the sea answers with a stare that seems to lengthen not downward, but toward them. Cameras that should be mirrors instead find passengers. A cap with threadbare braid, a cloak against a wind that cuts differently, a boy's narrow shoulders set hard against orders he intends to obey. The hull tilts a breath toward the well and stops, an offer held between fingertips. If witness is a contract, this is the moment to sign or refuse, knowing refusal will not erase the terms. They try names like probes in the dark and learn quickly that names answer back with ownership, so they speak only in verbs: hold, steady, note, count. The radio chooses this moment to find a frequency that has been waiting. A clear channel carrying a call sign discontinued before anyone aboard was born. No storm map accounts for the press that fills their lungs, a second atmosphere that smells of rusted iron and wet rope, of a hold packed not with cargo, but with unspent intentions. The letter's copperplate hand becomes hurried, sentences clipping like lines cut under strain, and a final imperative appears at the margin. Witness beneath. The well sharpens its edges, a mouth tightening to speech. They prepare without choreography, lines coiled, lamps secured, a camera strapped across a chest. The sea pauses like a page about to turn, and the quiet carries weight, as if silence itself had a waterline. They do not lower anyone. The sea raises the stair. It arrives with the politeness of something that has learned human pacing, each luminous tread presenting itself and holding. Patient as an usher's palm. The light is not light but a memory of daylight compressed into rungs, and it throws no reflection where it should. Within the circle, the water grows glassy and domed, bulging upward against reason until the topmost step kisses air and does not break. Beneath the surface, a shadow paces, long, deliberate, turning on landless landings. The letter's date sits in the mind like a coin under the tongue, altering every flavor. Somewhere, a woman finishes counting and inhales to begin again, and the inhale is the sound of rope drawn through wet wood. The bell buoy finally speaks, a single dull knock, not a ring, and in that restrained announcement, they understand that whatever was late has arrived on time. The contract declares itself without paper. Witness, write, seal. They accept because the alternative now looks like forgetting with consequences, and forgetting is a kind of weather that erodes from the inside. One steadies the page. One translates seeing into marks. One keeps the world from moving. In the dome, a figure stops climbing and turns not its head but its attention, and the intensity of that regard skims the skin like cold flame. The radio breathes once and clears its throat in a century's dialect, ready to take a message none of their codes were made to send. Above, clouds thicken to a single ceiling, a room with no corners. The bottle's glass hums at a pitch that lives behind the teeth. When the topmost tread lifts another inch and stays, the air buckles as if making room. Somewhere inside the stair a door unlatches, and every metal thing aboard remembers it is ore. The sea holds the step at the surface as if offering a proof too delicate to touch, and the air around it cools until breath feels borrowed. The radio coughs once, then arranges silence into a corridor, where meaning can walk without sound. Lines gather on the page by their own gravity. The pen keeps up, a skiff riding a larger tide. Somewhere in the hull, screws loosen a thought and then tighten again. The bell buoy angles as if tugged by an etiquette older than currents, granting the stair right of way. A pressure changes, ears pop without altitude, and the bottle hum deepens into a chord that seems to tune the bones. The letter's hand returns for one last instruction, none of them right. Seal now, when the step holds longest. They wait through 3 heartbeats and learn the measure, counting not with numbers but with the space between them. The stair brightens by a fraction, and the night leans closer to sea. On shore, the lighthouse writes its slow circle, a metronome for coasts and widows, and the headland receives their call with the gravity of stones that remember every name thrown against them. Jakob answers with breath first, then words, and his caution arrives as if carried in a thermos, hot enough to keep hands working. He describes a night when the stair rose to no one and still waited, a discipline that frightened him more than any storm. He tells them the bell refuses to ring when asked, but will knock once for agreement, twice for refusal. While he speaks, the static arranges itself into a second voice, counting in an accent that has learned to conserve syllables. The date tries the latch of every sentence, but they hold the door. He says if they seal at the hold's longest, the tide between years will carry, and if they hesitate, it will carry something else. The line thins, then steadies, like a pulse deciding. They test the measure they learned. 3 unspoken beats, and on the third the step firms like a drumhead. The air smells briefly of pitch and cedar, resinous and old. A wet print appears where no foot has climbed, not a full boot, but the ghost of pressure, as if intention itself had weight. The letter's margin darkens with new ink, that none of them applied. A line explains in the grammar of storms that witness is not descent, but reception. The stair holds, and the world writes by a degree. Somewhere metal expands with a satisfied tick. A voice beyond hearing finishes counting and rests, and in the rest there is an open hand. Their tools feel lighter, their coats heavier. The balance is precise, like a scale waiting for the last grain. They understand that writing is the lowering and sealing is the lift. The bell knocks once, agreement, and the boat seems to inhale for them. The instruction lands not as a sentence but as a temperature. Seal now. The bottle feels warmer than the night, as if it had been held by someone who just left. When the stopper lifts, the scent of tar wakes a memory none of them own. Shipyards ghosted by sawdust, pitch pots smoking, rope laid out like veins. The page enters first, then the air around the words, then a breath they didn't mean to give away. A thin smear of ink crawls to the rim and forms a line as clean as a horizon. The pitch relents and flows, soft as a tide losing interest, and the seam closes with a modest sigh. The water inside steadies, a lake in a glass weather, and the hum resolves into a note a person could sing only once. The stair waits without impatience. The bell, courteous, keeps its knock to memory. What remains open is the hand that must release what it wants to keep. Some choices are not dramatic. They are exact. The bottle, heavier by a history that has not yet finished, takes weight in the hand like a promise shaped to palm. The stare brightens no further and dims no less, holding the measure steady, a bridge extended only to its necessary length. The radio carries a breath that could be words or weather. They do not answer, which is its own answer. The bell grants one last courtesy and becomes again a thing of iron. They step to the rail and feel the boat square itself, as if a witness had stepped aboard and needed room. The horizon offers no opinion. The bottle arcs when released. Small, deliberate, complete. And when it touches the dome, the water accepts it the way pages accept ink. Not as invasion, but as completion. The night waits for the sound that will not carry, and what returns is only the shape of quiet. Altered. The bottle vanishes without splash, absorbed as if glass were the native shape of water. The dome flattens, the stare dims to a memory, and in the pause afterward, the boat feels wrong-sized, a room someone has just left. The bell holds its breath. They count 3 beats out of habit, and on the 3rd, the radio exhales a soft syllable in a diction unused by weather, then quiets like a hand withdrawn from a shoulder. On the chart, ink settles. On the skin, cold recedes but refuses to forget its path. The letter inside the bottle is theirs and not theirs. Words will arrive elsewhere, correctly attributed to hands that never touched them. A thrill of grief and relief shares a spine. They coil lines, stow lamps, tidy the deck, because ritual is how the mind survives an impossible event. The horizon reassembles into ordinary distance, and ordinary is suddenly the strangest thing they know. Harbor smells announce the world. Returning. Diesel, kelp, fish heads sleeping in plastic, coffee from a thermos that has outlived boats. The pier boards knock underfoot like friendly bones. Jakob waits with the look of someone who trusted their own superstition just enough to stay afraid, and when he hears the sparse account they can manage, he doesn't ask for more. He lifts the old lantern by its cold handle, and its cold handle nods as if to a timetable finally respected. In the office, he pulls a logbook, older than the room's paint, and opens to a page that should be blank and isn't. Their handwriting does not belong there, but it does. The date has chosen its shelf. He runs a finger along the edge of a sentence that they remember writing in rain. Here, recorded dry and patient. Then closes the book with a reverence that makes the act feel like a blessing and a burial at once. There is a cost that no ledger prints. The way sound sits differently in the chest afterward, tuned to a key a little lower than before. They walk the pier, and each board seems to test the weight of what they now carry. News spreads with its usual luck. Half rumor, half weather report. And by noon, a circle of faces accumulates at the bait shop door, looking for a story that will make the tide behave. They offer almost nothing. Silence is not deceit. It is a gasket that keeps the engine from shaking itself apart. Yet even as they refuse, the world conducts its own investigation. A child's kite stalls and hangs without wind. A gull forgets to correct its glide. The bell out on 13 gives a single courteous knock for no one. The sea does not threaten. It remembers. They begin to understand that witness means carrying memory forward, not explaining it backward. Night returns without theater, just a quieting of edges. In the wheelhouse, they play back what the old camera swallowed, and light, obedient to gears and springs, gives up 6 seconds of truth. The top of a luminous tread rising into air and holding like a held breath. No ghosts, no faces, just proof stripped to its bones. They watch it again, and it refuses to become less strange. Outside, the tide combs the pilings with an even hand, and the bell beyond the headland is a thought more than a sound. On the chart, the X remains a letter, an intersection of intent and place. They decide on what the letter called a witness task. Make a copy, Keep it against rot and doubt, and accept that most proof is for the heart that gathered it. A lamp hums. The pencil makes a tired strike. Somewhere, a bottle slides into reach of a man whose ship never reached its port, and he begins to read. Morning of the following day arrives as if time has remembered its job. The sea is merely water again, which feels like grace. They file the copy where a mind can return to it in lean hours, and they tuck the original loop away like a relic. Not for sale, not for argument, only for the moment when doubt eats more than it should. Jakob walks them to the end of the pier and, with the intimacy of men who have shared stormlight, speaks only this: if the bell knocks once on a clear day, listen. They nod, not promising courage, just attention. As they cast off, they realize the ledger the sea keeps is not about debts paid, but about witness carried forward. Somewhere in a year that was and wasn't, a crew warms their hands over a letter just arrived and decides to change their route by a hair's breadth. It is enough. The horizon places itself politely where it belongs. The clear day Jakob promised arrives like forgiveness, and with it, a hush that feels curated. The sea behaves itself in textbook ripples. Gulls argue at ordinary volumes, and rust looks merely like rust again. They are almost convinced of normal when the bell out on 30 knocks. Once, dry, polite, undeniable, though the breeze is from the wrong quarter and too gentle to touch iron. The sound rearranges the morning into a corridor, and every small object seems to face the same direction. Ropes lay pointing seaward. A newspaper crease becomes an arrow. Steam from a kettle leans as if deciding. The proof they keep might have been enough. But the world likes balances closed. Somewhere in the unspooling of routine, a page turns by itself. A sentence that never existed now has a memory. It asks nothing in words and everything in posture. They realize departure is not a choice, but a continuation, and continuations have schedules. They leave without ceremony, which is its own ceremony, and the headland nods them past like an usher done with warnings. Midway to the mark, radio static organizes around a cadence they now recognize. Not language, but counting held in a careful mouth. Instruments keep decorum. The needle neither twitches nor lies, which feels like consent. The sea wears noon like glass, and then, without theatrics, develops a seam where light diverges in two opinions. That seam is a sentence break, and beyond it, the water holds a faint, polite depression, as if waiting to see whether the story will proceed in present tense. The bottle they returned is gone into a year that can use it, but the ledger refuses asymmetry. What rises now is not invitation but receipt, the world's way of initialing the margin. They test their breathing against the remembered measure and discover they still carry the tempo in their ribs. When it begins, it does so with restraint, as if demonstrating it learned from their earlier patience. The stair lifts one tread only, modest as a raised hand in a crowded room, and holds. The air cools by degrees until each breath has edges. No sight of faces, no silhouettes pacing, only the architecture of arrival. The structure that allows a meeting to happen without spectacle. The old fear reports for duty, tidy, and on time, but carries less authority now. They have already written a portion of this. The radio clears its throat and stays silent, a courtesy that feels like trust. On the chart, the X remains where they placed it, but the paper seems thicker, as if it has been asked to bear more. They count 3 beats that belong to no metronome, and on the third, the tread firms to the exact pitch of recall. The world feels hinged again. The hinge better oiled. What arrives next is not object, but outcome. The stair holds like a promise, and in that poise, the world edits the past by increments that will never be noticed by those spared. Somewhere, a ship's quartermaster recalculates by a hair's breadth for reasons he will later call instinct. Somewhere, a nurse reads a letter that tells her to shift supplies to a lifeboat. Somewhere, a boy with flags trusts a gut feeling disguised as duty. None of it is here, yet all of it is here, braided into the air that tastes of tar and rain. They do not speak names because names imply ownership. They mark the measure because measure implies witness. The bell does not knock. It approves by doing nothing. When the tread finally thins and lowers, it is not a withdrawal, but a completion, like a page placed back where it always belonged. What remains is the quiet, modified to fit. Return is not triumph. It is accuracy. The harbor takes them back with the modesty of places that have seen stranger things than men keeping their word. People ask politely and are given answers that fit in small rooms, and those answers are true in the way a map is true. Faithful to scale, not to weather. In the office, the logbook opens to a page that is somehow both new and thumb-worn. A neat hand has already recorded an outcome in the past, and it reads, like relief, written with discipline. Jakob closes it without reading aloud, as if sound might bruise what has been preserved. They wash the deck twice, not to erase but to honor. They stow the camera like a reliquary. Ordinary chores acquire the gravity of witness at rest. When evening lowers, the bell beyond the headland is content enough to be iron, and content iron is the sweetest form of silence they know. A week rinses through the harbor and the story thins to workable silence. Weather returns to its small talk. Nets resume their arithmetic. Footsteps on the pier stop sounding like decisions. Yet, normal has a seam, and once your fingers find it, you keep worrying it. Some nights the lighthouse throws an extra pulse that no schedule prints. Some mornings the kettle steams a tune that matches a count you never learned but can't forget. They do not visit the coordinates. They visit their chores with ritual care, and ritual is a language the sea respects. The logbook sits closed like a hand that has finally unclenched. The camera sleeps. The chart's X fades beneath grease and fingerprints, an old sentence rubbed into grammar. Still, there is a way the bell sometimes refuses to be iron in the mind, an echo that returns after the sound has left. You can board a boat the same as before, but you never board the same you. The parcel arrives addressed in a hand that would be comfortable writing weather on slate. No return. Only the port's name spelled as it was before a war renamed it. Inside, a brass token greened by patient air, stamped with a ship's crest, "Nobody here has served," and a single sentence on rag paper that says nothing the world can prosecute. Witness received. There is no date. There is this, that. Knowledge of one. Jakob doesn't ask how or why. He sets the token on the sill where the office takes its light and watches it not shine. They turn the paper in their hands like a tide chart that predicts only ethics. It is enough, and somehow not. Like finishing a prayer and discovering it cued for repetition by design. Outside, the bell is silent, and therefore speaking. The ledger closes with a weight you can feel in the wrist. They put the token where time reaches it. Slowly, they go out once more, not for summons but for symmetry. Because balance is a superstition the body insists upon. Noon lays itself flat. The sea is a merciful unread page. They idle near where the X used to feel loud and say nothing that might be taken as a knock. The air holds. The radio practices courtesy. The bell keeps to iron. No luminous geometry troubles the skin of water, and that absence is its own benediction. What they've given has reached, as all true offerings do, a hand they will never shake. They test their hearts against the remembered tempo and find it has become resting rate. The horizon is a polite line again. They drop a small wreath of rope, ends and rusted hooks over the side. Not worship, not grief, just a thank you in the dialect of work. The sea, expert in ceremony, acknowledges by remaining the sea. Night brings back the wheelhouse like a familiar book opened to a different margin. Rain pencils the glass. The lamp keeps its small sun. They sit without needing to fill the air, because the air is already speaking in the language of done things. In the window, reflections arrange a courtesy not owed. 3 faces they never owned, aligned as if for a muster check that finds all present and properly dismissed. No voices, no requests, only regard and the specific relief of orders rescinded. A shape like a step edges the dark, not rising, only existing enough to say its geometry survives beyond witness. The radio's pilot light is a patient eye. They nod once, not toward the sea, but toward the idea of it, which is sometimes more exact. Outside, iron remains iron. Inside, the page in the mind finally turns and stays turned, and the story does the rarest thing a story can. It rests. Morning opens like a well-made hinge. They cast off to ordinary work, and the ordinary receives them. Fish that are only fish. Weather that is just weather. On shore, a child shakes rain from a kite and learns the patient art of wind again. The ledger the sea keeps continues, not as threat, but as archive. And now they know where their line falls inside it. Not authors, not heroes, just faithful copyists who wrote what arrived and sealed it where time could use it. They will not tell the story to argue with disbelief. They will tell it when silence needs company. Somewhere in a year that cannot meet them without wrecking both, a crew reads a letter with the right name on it and moves by a hair. That hair is the difference. The bell does not knock. It doesn't have to. The horizon takes its place with elegant indifference, and the day accepts their small, precise promise to keep watch.